Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This is episode number 45 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the show. My name is Jason Romano. Thank you for being a part of our program today. You can download and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are found. Click that subscribe button, and that allows you to have this podcast come right to your device every single time we release a new episode. You can also leave a review on iTunes for us. Let us know what you think of the podcast, how we're doing, any guest ideas you might have. You can also email me, jason@sportspectrum.com, and let us know any ideas you have in regards to the podcast or just a good story that you want us to cover on Sports Spectrum, both for the magazine or for an article on the internet on sportspectrum.com. So check us out, reach out to us. We love to hear from you, and check out all the great content that we're producing, both with the magazine, the podcast, and on the web. Today's guest is Arizona Cardinals running back David Johnson. Now, for some of you fans out there who play fantasy football, you may have taken David right at the top of your draft. He was the consensus number one overall pick in most fantasy football leagues, and we talked to David about that. And interestingly enough, he doesn't really play fantasy football and really had no concept or idea of that until this year, when he basically became everybody's number one pick. And then week one came along of the 2017 season. And as David is going down the sidelines, about to catch a pass from Carson Palmer, his quarterback, he gets nailed in the wrist and dislocates it and has surgery. And ESPN and other media outlets are announcing that he's out for 2 to 3 months, and he's basically going to miss the majority of the 2017 season. And yes, that hurt fantasy football owners, but we're talking about a human being here, a man who plays football. And we talk about how devastating that was for him, or if it was devastating. I ask him about that, and I ask him about how the recovery is going. But even more, David's a man of faith. He's a married man to Megan and has a son, David Johnson Jr., now born earlier this year in January of 2017. And his faith is strong, and it's actually fairly new, his faith. It really didn't take shape for him until college. So we talk about that a little bit and really kind of dive deep into spiritually what it's like to be an NFL player, some of the great things going on in the Arizona Cardinals locker room, and really what God has been teaching him through the most difficult time really in his life of having this injury and having to sit on the sidelines and watch his team go to battle every Sunday without it. So enjoy this episode. This is episode number 45, and here he is, Arizona Cardinals running back, David Johnson. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, it's great to have you here. And obviously, you have a little time on your hands right now to do a podcast, and we do appreciate that. Certainly not what you were planning, but let's start with week one, and let's talk about the injury. So it's the 2017 season. His expectations are high. You're coming off of a first-team All-Pro status, first Pro Bowl, and late in the third quarter of the opening game against the Lions, you catch a pass, and a helmet just kind of appears to be nails you into your wrist, and boom, we got a dislocation, and you have surgery the next day. First of all, I just want to ask you how you're feeling. How's the rehab coming along?
Rehab's coming along great. I really can't do much. Really just getting a lot of mental work in. But, I had a great surgeon who did a great job, and there's really no pain. Wrist is feeling good. Just really have to have this cast on for a couple weeks.
And then what's the process here? We're taping this, just so people who are listening now, we're taping this in early October, about a month since the injury took place. What's the process in terms of your timetable? Do you have one yet? Is the hope still was 2 to 3 months, I think, when the initial diagnosis happened?
There really isn't a timetable. Really just trying to get the wrist as healthy as possible. Really just trying to get as full range of motion as possible. And there's really no timetable, just because I don't know how long that's going to take, depending on when I have the cast off, how long it takes my wrist to have that full range, as much as possible, full range of motion.
Have you ever had an injury like this in your wrist or your arm, or any kind of injury to that area?
No, I've never really had this injury. It's a weird injury, and it's really not a common injury in football. And ironically, surprisingly, me and the rookie running back, TJ Logan, had the same has the same injury. So it's really kind of weird to have this.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Well, let's go back to the moment when you were injured, when it happened. Your faith is strong, and we're going to talk about your faith in Christ in a little bit. But I'm just curious, what was going through your mind when that happened? Did you have any idea the severity of the injury? Sort of what was going through your mind after that injury took place?
So actually, when the injury took place, I didn't even know that it was a dislocated wrist. On the same play where I caught the ball, I had got the wind knocked out of me, so I was actually more worried about that, trying to catch my wind, and I didn't realize my wrist was feeling weird until I caught my wind and I went into the next series. And I was running with the ball, and it just didn't feel like I was securing the ball well enough. And I ended up actually fumbling. And that's when I really realized that there was something up. And after going in and getting the X-ray, they seen something was fishy with the wrist. So and I thought actually going into the locker room, I thought it was, just a sprained wrist that I'd be able to tape it up and get back on the field. And, I thought I was going to be able to keep playing. If anything, like I said, tape it up. But unfortunately, it was the scaphoid lunate tear, um, and I had to get it repaired.
Wow, it's such a bizarre injury. Now, I'm curious from your perspective as a man of faith. Do you remember what you were thinking in the aftermath of that injury after you found out the diagnosis? Was there any type of anger or questioning, like, God, why would you do this right now? It's the first game. Was there any type of questioning there, just some anger, spiritually wise, for you?
Spiritualized, no. I wasn't mad at God or anything. I really was just upset at myself. I think the biggest thing I was more upset was the fumble that I had gotten,
Mm.
and I had lost the ball. And I don't know if I know they got the ball, but I don't know if they ended up scoring or whatever. But I just know it didn't help out the team. I think I was more focused on having that fumble and putting our team at a bad spot.
It's interesting as a player that that's what upsets you. You're not upset obviously with God. You're not upset with, the injury is the injury, but you're upset with the performance on the field. That's kind of the mentality of a football player, right?
Yeah, for sure. Football players have different mentalities, but for me, I'm blessed. I'm blessed, and I thank God for giving me this platform, for giving me this ability and the skill to play in the league. So I really never tried to get down on God as much as I can, just because if it wasn't for Him, I feel like I wouldn't be where I am today.
The Twitter and social media world reacted quickly when that injury happened because of your fantasy status, fantasy football leagues around the country. I know you're chuckling. Number one overall pick in many leagues. And I know you can't help but be aware of it, especially if the media is talking to you. But were you even aware that type of attention was happening after your surgery was over, after you had the injury?
No, I was not aware until a lot of people got on my social media. A lot of hearing about a lot of stuff on, the news and stuff, and that's really what it was down to. Um, it was the injury, but mainly it was really fantasy football. How can people bounce back? The fantasy owners bounce back from losing me and stuff, and that's the stuff I was hearing the most. So it's crazy how big fantasy football has gotten. I
So
didn't know
big.
anything about fantasy football when I first got to the league. I was kind of forced into learning about it, and it's just a crazy thing that is going on with the NFL.
Well, when you score 12 touchdowns in your rookie year, you're going to be quickly acclimated to the fantasy football world.
Yeah,
Trust
for
me.
sure. That's definitely true.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking to David Johnson here on the Sports Spectrum podcast, Arizona Cardinals running back. David, I want to ask you about your faith. This is a faith in sports podcast, your faith in Jesus Christ. You grew up in Clinton, Iowa. I just want to know for you, when did your faith in Christ sort of start to take shape for you? When did that become real to you?
So my faith, when I was growing up wasn't huge, but I obviously knew about God. I went to church and stuff. I bounced around from different churches, and I started learning a little bit more. But when I was younger, I was so worried about life, with sports, school, and
Mm-hmm.
everything, and I didn't know much about God. But I think when I really sat down and got serious about God, had to have been in college. It was my second year in college where I started really focusing in on what God has done, what Jesus has done for us, and learning more about Him, and really letting God take my life, and learn more about him and what he's done.
Was it a particular moment? Was it a mentor, somebody that kind of sat down with you and said, "Listen, David, this is kind of how it works," or was it just sort of I don't know, something that you saw or thought of on your own?
Mine was a mentor. It was our FCA Cedar Valley leader. His name is Ken Troutman. He conducts football meetings every Wednesday where we got together and talked about God. And then he also did every Monday where it was anyone's invited, students or anyone, and we just talked about God that day as well. And that's really who helped mentor me, helped teach me about the Bible, helped teach me about what Jesus and what God has done. And he's the one who really has molded me into learning more about God and stepping over the faith line.
So you mentioned Northern Iowa. You're in college. You have a ton of success on the field in your 4 years there, certainly setting numerous records. And you mentioned off the field how your faith really came to fruition in college. But I'm curious about other things going on. You were grinding it out in college, off the field, working odd jobs. You meet your wife there, obviously. What was college life like for you?
College life for me was way different than what I hear from other players, especially on the team. My college life, like you said, I had to grind it out. I had a summer job doing weird things with asbestos removal. And then I fortunately ended up going to dorm duty where we were maintenance guys and we cleaned up the dorms. We fixed the dressers, um, uh, fixed the windows, fixed the drains and everything. So that's the stuff I had to do in the summer where I think other college student athletes, they were able to just work out and I had to do a job and I had to work out at the same time. So I think that's really where I learned how to have my work ethic.
You say
And then also
you say you had to do the job. Like, was that required, or is that something that you just wanted to do?
it wasn't required, but for us to be able to work out at the in college at our facility, we
Okay.
had to stay there. You know, we had to pay for our living, and we didn't get money to pay for rent or to pay for food, so we had to get a job. Or unless your family or parents or someone would pay for your living, you were on your own, and
Mm.
that's what I had to do. So I had to work for to pay for my rent in the summer, so I could train with the team at UNI.
Now, tell us about the time in college, how you met your wife, and how that kind of relationship started to blossom.
So I met my wife in a class. It was a health class, and she getting her nursing degree, and I was doing my health minor. And my wife is from Cedar Falls, my college town, and so we had to do a field experience. And her being from Cedar Falls, I wanted to find out somewhere I can get some community hours in for my health class, for our health class, and so I asked her, and that's kind of how we started talking. And then, it kind of just fell into a relationship. Luckily for me, it just fell into a relationship where, we started getting closer and closer, hanging out more and communicating more. And then, here we are now, married with a beautiful son.
How did God play a role in all that as you guys started dating and coming together as in a relationship?
God played a huge role. She, surprisingly, the church that I attended on Sundays, Prairie Lakes, she grew up going to that, and her small group leader was from Prairie Lakes as well. And they also knew my small group leader, Ken Troutman. So we became big in our faith. We went to church together. And she also not had to, but she also wanted to learn about God, and she had met with her small group leader as well. And so we just got stronger in our faith together. And, I ended up becoming an FCA leader for the football team, and she was right along with me. We were talking to each other about God and bouncing stuff, ideas, and topics from each other and learning more together.
What have you learned about marriage in the short time you've been together with your wife?
What I've learned about marriage is I think the biggest thing is, having communication, loving each other, no matter ups or downs, and being there for each other. I think that's the biggest thing is just being there for each other. I was being there for her throughout her pregnancy, throughout everything, and she's being here for me throughout injuries, throughout the sore bodies, after a game, throughout the ups where I'm on Sports Illustrated, throughout the downs where I'm out on IR. So I think that's the biggest thing is just supporting one another through everything that goes on in life.
In 2015, you're selected in the third round, 86th overall to the Arizona Cardinals. Take us back to that moment. What do you remember most about that day?
What I remember most about that day was it went by so fast. It being such one of the most impactful days of my life, it felt like a dream. When I got drafted, I got the call, and I just remember sitting there feeling like I was in a dream, seriously.
Hmm.
Not knowing how my life was going to change, not knowing what was going to happen when I got to the Cardinals, when I got to Arizona. And me and my wife were together in Florida, and we were just. I think she didn't understand what was going on because I was kind of just sitting there, kind of dazed, and so she was trying to get excited, but I just didn't know how to feel because it was such an important moment for me, and I just didn't know how to react. I was obviously very proud, very excited, very glad, but it was just a whole bunch of stuff going through my head. All the sacrifices that I've gone through, all the ups and downs that I've gone through, to get to that point to where it felt like a dream.
Had you ever been to Arizona prior to being drafted by them?
No, I've never been to Arizona. And the first thing I heard was the heat.
Yeah.
That was the first thing is
And it's real,
get ready
right?
for the heat. Yo, man, the summers are brutal out here. The winters are amazing though. I would definitely take Arizona the climate because you only have to deal with it for about 4 months, and then the rest of the months is all great weather. So I think I lucked out.
It's a culture shock, I have to imagine, compared to growing up in Iowa. I've never been to Iowa. I'm guessing it's just a giant culture shock, right?
Yeah, 180 for sure because our winters are brutal. We have snow everywhere. The wind is bitter, and it's definitely a whole different culture shock. Not just the weather, but also the uh, the atmosphere because growing up in Iowa, it's a lot slower. So there's not a lot of dry highways. People aren't just on the go. Everyone's really nonchalant, relaxed. And when I got to Arizona, everyone's speeding by. Everyone's hurrying to get to places, and the traffic is crazy. And it just the little things like me having to go to class, I would leave about 10 minutes to before I
Hmm.
need to get somewhere in Iowa. Me coming here to Arizona, I gotta leave about an hour to go to a different spot. And if we and then also not just that, but if we go to Scottsdale from Chandler, it's about an hour, 45-minute drive. But in Iowa, if you go 45 minutes, you're in a different city. You're in a different state sometimes. So it's just some of those crazy things.
We're talking to David Johnson here, Arizona Cardinals running back on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Now, David, your rookie year, you get to Arizona on the field, pretty good. You have success right away. Like I mentioned earlier, you scored 12 touchdowns. You play a key role your rookie season, and you're in the NFC Championship game. But my question for you is more off the field. As a believer in Christ, what was life like for you spiritually, adapting into the NFL and sort of the rigors that come with professional football for you spiritually? What was that like?
Spiritually, it was actually pretty tough just because I when I came in as a rookie, it was a whole new change for me. So I didn't have the normal where I go and talk to my Bible group leader, Ken Troutman. I didn't have people that I normally go and talk to about the Bible. I had to kind of figure it out on my own, me and my wife. So we just, spoke to each other, had to find a new church and everything. So it was actually pretty tough. I felt like my rookie year, I might have, slipped off my spiritual trail for a little bit, but I was able to talk to Ken, talk to my wife, and regain that strength in God. And I feel like that was probably one of the toughest things is, especially since I had to learn the playbook. I had so much going on in my life. I'm an adult now. I have to
Yeah.
uh, pay for, I have to fend for myself as far as food, paying rent, and everything like that. To where I think it kind of strayed me away from learning about God and learning more in the Bible, reading the Bible and stuff. So that was a lot going on.
Who were some of the guys on the team that you may have looked to as mentors, or maybe you had a team chaplain or somebody that was able to kind of at least keep you afloat during that rookie season when, like you said, everything's coming at you like a whirlwind?
I definitely feel like I lucked out because luckily the guy who is our rookie developer, Anthony Edwards, is also a pastor, and he's one of the guys we as rookies we speak to the most. So I was actually lucked out to be able to talk to the same guy who talks to us about financial dependability,
Mm.
and also talk to him about off the field stuff and on the field stuff, and then about the Bible. So I feel like I lucked out because I can talk to the same guy about mostly anything that I need to talk about as a rookie. So he was the one who really, I started talking to about faith, getting back on the faith trail, and getting back strong in reading the Bible.
Was there a player, a teammate of yours that maybe you saw and you were like, okay, I gotta be around that guy a lot, whether it's spiritually or just how to carry yourself as a professional? Because you got a couple of veterans there who everybody knows who are pretty solid as people and in their faith. So I'm just curious for you, was there a particular teammate?
So there was a lot of teammates that has carried me in the aspect of how to carry myself and how to be a professional on and off the field. Larry Fitzgerald's being one of the biggest ones. He's one of the guys who helped teach me the playbook. Who not even necessarily who I've gone up and spoke to, but just watching his work ethic
Hmm.
on the practice field. He's one of the guys who's playing catch before and after practice. He's one of those guys that's always trying to get better on his hands, even though everyone knows he has one of the best catching abilities as far as receivers in the league. And just watching him off the field as well, he's such a professional. The way he conducts himself, he's one of the guys who's taught me that when I have to do an interview after a games, most of the guys are still, you take a shower and most of the guys are still getting dressed. And he's one of the guys who taught me, tell the cameras, tell the media, let me get dressed first so I can look presentable in front of the
Wow.
cameras because you never know who's watching you as you're talking in that interview. So he's one of the guys who taught me to let them know, let me get on my clothes so I can, look apart and look professional while I'm talking to you guys. And he's also teaching me, how to do other stuff, financials, and then one of the biggest things is just watching him on the field. He is one of the best route runners I've seen, and I've learned, it's not necessarily how fast you run the route to get open. It's, your techniques, how to run the route, use your leverage, use your size, and everything like that. And then also Andre Ellington being a big guy, big mentor in me because me being a running back, he is also a running back, and he's taught me the playbook. He's teaching me the blitz protection, and he's teaching me how to run routes as a running back because he was the one who was doing it before I got here. So just watching him, and then all the running backs really were helping me. Kerwin, Steph when he was here, Marion when he was here, and teaching me the playbook, and then just spiritually. I would have to say Drew Stanton. He's one of the guys during camp. He leads our players only Bible study.
Hmm.
And he's such a good guy to listen to, talk to, because he knows so much about the Bible. And he also goes to Anthony Edwards, who's the guy I was mentioning about being our player developer, and also who is also a preacher. So he's the one who talks. He talks to him, and then he conducts our players only Bible study. So I've learned from him, talking to him in our Bible study, and just picking his brain on different aspects, especially as an athlete, where we can learn from the Bible.
David, describe for the fan or the listener of this podcast that can't be in that players only Bible study what it's like. How does it work? Is Drew literally leading it and it's a bunch of guys just kind of listening like you're in a classroom, or is it conversation, more of like a small group setting? Talk about what that sort of Bible study, players only Bible study is like.
So it is a small group session, usually about 10 to 15 of us, and we just get around at the dining center, get around the table, and Drew is the one who's leading it. So he's the one who's starting it off by prayer, and then he talks about what the topic is to that day, whether it's financial, whether it's anything that players or just people in general, guys in general, have to deal with. And he's the one who starts it, and then from there he'll ask questions. Guys will answer or give their thoughts about that topic or that verse that we read, and we'll read verses, go along. Different guys will read verses, and we'll just talk and communicate, conversate about the topic or about the verse, what we think we got out of the verse compared to what another guy thinks he got out of the same verse. So that's what I really learned, because if I just read the verse myself, maybe I miss something that someone else has thought about, or a different perspective that that person has got from the same verse.
Proverbs 27:17 says iron sharpens iron, and it sounds so much like the locker room of an NFL team, especially for you, David, that reigns so supremely true, that it really is about sharpening each other and accountability and fellowship.
That is so true. Iron definitely sharpens iron, because, when we're all holding each other accountable, that's the biggest thing with us, is that not just spiritually, but football wise, but especially spiritually, guys, when we hold each other accountable, when we're talking with those verses and communicating and talking about different ways that we can show our glory to God through our platform, how we conduct ourselves, so people don't have to question if we are, God-fearing people. People don't have to ask us if we are Christians. They know by the way we conduct ourselves, by the way we speak, by the way we play football, even just the small things that I've learned from what I what I've learned from the Bible. Just those small things go a long way of how I conduct myself.
We're talking to David Johnson here. A couple more minutes with him on the Sports Spectrum podcast. He's the Arizona Cardinals running back. And life changes quite a bit for you, David, over the past couple years. You mentioned getting married. Last year, 2016, you have a breakout season. You're a first-team All-Pro, one of the top running backs, if not the top running back in the NFL. And then you become a dad. So I really want to ask you about the season, first of all, and what that was like, all of a sudden becoming the man, seeing the touches, catching the ball out of the backfield, a complete season really for you as a player. What was that like? And then we'll talk about the big change off the field.
It was great. It was a crazy season for me, because, I was having a good success, but as a team, it wasn't where we wanted to be. So it was actually very tough for me, just because, I might have just been having that, individual success, but as a team, it wasn't going the way. So I really was so focused on the team that those individual stats was hard for me to get happy about, or hard for me to be proud about. So it was a crazy season for me, especially since coming off 2015 season, where we were, NFC West champs, and we were in the championship to go to the Super Bowl. So how crazy one year has changed the team, and that, I think that was probably the toughest thing for me, is having those individual stats, but as a team, not feeling like I've done enough to help out the team.
Did the game just seem to come, I don't want to say easier, because that would be silly of me to ever say the word easy for an NFL player, but did the game just kind of come to you a little bit more gradually in a way in the second year versus that first year?
Yeah. Oh, it's night and day, because that first year, man, my head was spinning. I had a lot of mental errors, and I just felt like I was on a roller coaster. I'd make a good catch, but I'd fumble, or I'd miss a block, but then score a touchdown. So my first year was just a head spin. Second year, I learned more. I learned more of the offense, and I learned more of how to, play in games. And I think the biggest thing that people will say is the games slow down. They slow down a lot more, where I can focus in and I can calm down throughout my second year, where I'm actually able to do a lot more, but not feel like my head is spinning. So I felt like that's the biggest thing, is that it slowed down. I was able to um, pick up the blitzes, or able to run routes, and actually Bruce Arians had put more on my shoulders, because I was learning so much in my second year.
David, I remember back in February of 2017, one of my last assignments before I left ESPN was working on the Mike and Mike show. And I think it might have been our very last interview on our very last day of shows in Houston. You were a guest on set. And I remember Mike and Mike, Greeny and Golick, asking you about becoming a dad. And I remember you saying that your son was there in Houston, which was surprised a lot of us, because, he was a newborn. He was only a couple weeks old or whatever. But I want to just ask you about that time and what it was like to become a dad and what that process has been like for you now that you're the father to David Jr.
That time for me was so amazing. I was so proud of being a father. That moment was so amazing, but also it was a scared moment for me because no matter how much I prepared to be a father, it's not the same as when my son actually comes into the world, and now I have responsibility to help my wife raise him to the best of our abilities. So it was a lot of stuff going on, and I think I was more scared being a father than coming to Arizona because I've been playing football for so long. But me being a father was something new. It's something new that I've never done before. And like I said, you can read all the books and learn as much as you can, but it's not the same as when he actually comes out of the world. But like I said, I wouldn't change it for the world for anything. I'm amazed at how God has made miracles
Hmm.
in birthing, and so it's just it was a crazy, amazing moment for me.
So what have you learned? What have you learned now that you're a dad?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is being there, supporting him because I
Hmm.
might not know exactly what I'm doing. Changing diapers, feeding him. I might not know what I'm doing exactly or doing the right thing, but just being there, learning from those mistakes or those moments, and just being there, supporting him, trying to be there for every milestone he had. So when he rolled over, I was there. I'm trying to be there. I was there when he started crawling, so I'm trying to be there when he starts walking, when he starts speaking. I think that's the biggest thing is just being there at everything, that every development milestone that he's has or is gonna have, is very important to me.
As we wrap it up here on the podcast with David Johnson, Arizona Cardinals running back. David, and thank you for the time. I just have a question we usually ask our guests on the podcast. We've done about 50 of these now. And the question has always been, what has God been teaching you right now? And it sounds like you've answered that a little bit. So I'll ask it a little differently in the sense of what is your biggest struggle currently spiritually for you? What has God been kind of working on you a little bit in your life right now?
I think God is working on me right now as being a leader, and being not just spiritually, but spiritually with my wife and everything, but also just being a leader for the team. So He's doing stuff to put me in positions to try to be a leader, but sometimes I get scared or I don't want to. I feel like I'm going to say the wrong thing to the team or do the wrong thing, and I feel like He keeps wanting to put me in those positions, those uncomfortable positions where I have to break down a huddle or I have to talk to, especially now with the injury, that's all I can do is be a coach or a leader to the team. And just like that, the injury now, how do I become a leader now, be still stay involved with the team? I feel like that's where God is leading me. And also just, I think the struggle right now is we are reading, but I think the biggest thing is, trying to find a church, and a place that we can go to and call it our church home while we're in Arizona.
Let me just ask you this real quick before we say goodbye. Is that hard to find a church home when you're a football player and then acclimating yourself as just a regular member of the church versus, you're David Johnson now. You're recognized. People know who you are, and trying to acclimate yourself into a church. Has that been difficult for you?
Yes, it has been tough, because, like you said, I sometimes I just want to be a normal person where I
Right.
can attend a church or a restaurant, um, and just go and try to learn from the sermon. And sometimes it gets tough just because there are football fans out here, Arizona fans, and they might want to take a photo or just talk to me about football. And now with the injury, now it's all I've been spoken to about. And I love talking to people, the fans, because God has given me this platform to talk to them. But sometimes I just want to sit there and try to learn and try to focus in on the Bible and focusing on that, what I'm trying to learn from that sermon that day. And then that gets tough. So we're trying to find a church that where we can feel like we can sit there and actually um, gain knowledge from what's going on.
Hmm. Well, listen, David Johnson, Arizona Cardinals running back, man, I really appreciate you joining us here and sharing your heart a little bit on the podcast. And best wishes to you, and hopefully we'll have you back in here down the line.
Thank you.
And we do appreciate David Johnson, Arizona Cardinals running back, joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And David was really great. I love his heart for the Lord and his heart for wanting to serve and wanting to be a leader in his locker room. And it's definitely something he's learning right now, having to sit on the sidelines in one of the most difficult times of his young career and not being able to play and being injured. But one thing that we didn't mention during the interview that you could know, and David mentioned it when the interview was over, was that he was doing this interview from the Arizona Cardinals team facility. And just because David's injured doesn't mean that he's not with the team. He's very involved. He's going to meetings. He's going to practice. He attends all the games. He obviously goes to the home games, but he's on the road traveling with the team whenever they have a road game as well. He wants to be a leader. He wants to be a part of what that team is doing in Arizona. And so David has made it his mission to be a leader, whether he's injured or not. Despite his circumstances, he continues to rise up and become an integral part of what the Arizona Cardinals are doing as a football team. So we commend David, and we do thank him for being a part of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Just a little behind-the-scenes preview, if you will. David is going to be featured in our next magazine issue of Sports Spectrum. So part of this podcast, after we were done taping it, we asked him a few more questions, and we're going to be doing a nice long feature on him for Sports Spectrum's next issue in the magazine. So stay tuned for that. That'll be really good. I think you guys will really enjoy sort of a little bit more in-depth in the article than we went with the podcast in terms of David and all that he's been doing since he got injured and just what God has been working on in his life since the injury. So again, thank you, David Johnson, for being a part of the show, and thank you for listening. We appreciate you. As always, you can reach us on Twitter at sports_spectrum. You can reach me at Jason Romano. And you can email us jason@sportspectrum.com. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. We will see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast.